Welcome to the Community of Saints podcast. My name is Roberto Aguilar. So today I wanted to talk about SEEK Utah 2025. And some of you who either went or know about SEEK or kept up with it, it's kind of been a long time. Hasn't been that long of a time, almost a month since it happened, since I was there. Maybe it's not that long or that inappropriate to be posting so much later. Just get busy and do stuff, and time to recollect and put something together. But what I want to do is have a recap of every day. So yeah, I just want to first start off by saying how I experienced it and how I went about doing things and going to certain events and certain talks and talking to different people and people who I got to talk to, and kind of the stuff that isn't recorded or wasn't recorded, that wasn't documented by me or by SEEK, right? And then I want to go through the keynotes of every day. So every day there was a keynote, right? These were the big talks, right? That everyone was at, the big hitters in the Catholic world: Father Mike Schmidt, Sister Mary Grace, Dr. Arthur Brooks, these people that kind of everyone came to see. And these are like the headliners of each day, right? And sometimes there was 2 a day, sometimes 1. But I wanted to just recap on those and talk about those talks. So I actually didn't take notes while watching these in person. A couple reasons. Sometimes it's hard to take notes, at least for me. Maybe I'm not an experienced note taker live, because I'll take notes and then I'll miss whatever's going on next, and then I'll just be behind, and then I'm just trying to get things on paper as opposed to listening. So I just try to listen and take in as much as I can and take it for what it was and enjoy the experience. Thankfully, they record all of the sessions. Every single talk is actually recorded, not just the keynotes, but every talk that was there was recorded. So I was actually very grateful for that, for 2 reasons. I got to talk to more people and miss out on certain talks, but I can just go back now and listen to them. And so I didn't really miss out, because I guess it's cool to see the people in person, but it's the same information. So the time I didn't spend at certain talks, I spent talking to other religious people, the religious life, the brothers and sisters there, the priests, the monks that were there, that I wouldn't have gotten to, but I can still go back and watch the videos, right? So what I did was I went back through all the keynotes and took notes on them. And I kind of recollected, like, oh yes, I remember this and thinking about this, or oh, I missed this part, and was able to take notes and take a lot more detailed notes as well. So I want to talk about those as well. First, I want to talk about my experience. So this was my first ever SEEK. I've never been to SEEK. I only found out about it recently. So at my parish, we have focused missionaries. We're so grateful to have focused missionaries, right? And so I believe they went to SEEK 2 other times before this, or people in the parish have gone before this. So I was introduced to it first by YouTube videos of it, watching Father Mike Schmidt's and Sister Mary Grace from SEEK of last year. But I had no idea that's what SEEK was, or that was SEEK. I just talks, right? Oh, it's Father Mike Schmidt's talk. Let me watch this. And until later, I put them together, like that was SEEK, and I'm going to the same SEEK conference, of course, later, and was like, oh my gosh, this is huge, right? And to know that Father Mike Schmidt was going to be there, all these big Catholic speakers, right? Sister Mary Grace, Trent Horn, was very exciting for me. I was looking forward to it so much, and it certainly paid off. So yes, the Focus Missionaries pushed us to fundraise and really encourage us to go and by any means possible to get us there. And after going, I certainly understand why. It was one of the greatest experiences ever. And I would advise anyone to go, Catholic or not, Christian or not, to go. It is an amazing, amazing experience. And I'm sure I'm going to go again and go as much as I possibly can, because it was truly a great experience, and I'm so grateful I got to go, and so grateful for the Focus missionaries that were there to encourage us to go and even put that into my mind, right? And so after that, I signed up, I fundraised, I got people to donate. I'm very thankful for, and then we left on a bus, 15 hour drive on a bus there, and then obviously back another 15 hours to Utah all the way from California. It was definitely interesting because you hear Utah and you think Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, but I did not meet one Mormon. Granted, I didn't go out, walk around, and talk to people outside of really the conference center, and inside the conference center, the majority Catholic people. But it was still very nice. It's always nice to travel, right? And it snowed on the last day, or maybe the second to last day. So that was nice too, to experience some snow in a city, not just as Californians. I think we know about the snow because we can go and travel up the mountains to snow. But it's one thing to snow in the city, right? To be walking on the streets and it be snowing, or it be piles of snow, right? So that was definitely a cool experience. But now to my actual Seek experience. What was that like? I went up to every booth I could that had a priest or religious there and talked to them. Probably every single one. Almost every single booth, right? And on my badge, it said, I'm a high school student. I'm a Catholic student, or I'm a high school student and a Catholic student, I guess. I'm a high school student. You see, my first name's not capitalized. That was my fault. So these people would see my badge or my name tag and see I'm a high school student and be so surprised. Or there's a point where I covered it. I was still going to tell them anyways. And they would be so surprised. I'd get the same response almost every single time of either they let high schoolers in here, or you're a high school student. You don't look like a high school student. Anyways, but it was still great that I was able to experience it, especially because I'm in high school, and spread it to other high school students. I didn't meet any other high school students. Granted, I didn't talk to many other people who went there as students, because I was mainly talking to a lot of priests and religious. But I would still say I don't regret it. I got to meet some really cool priests, some really cool brothers, and to get in contact with a lot of them, and to have contacts in Florida, in Arizona, in California, was and is really amazing, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do that. I'm not now I'm not downplaying the speakers or anything, but I can always go back and watch those, or watch any talk, right? And I didn't go to the National Eucharistic Conference, but I'm able to watch those talks. Maybe not all of them, but what I'm saying is that information is available. But the availability of all those priests and religious is not as available, especially here where I live. It's not like there's a bunch of monasteries and abbeys around me, right? So that opened my mind and my heart to so many new things. I got to meet so many new people and learn so many new things that I would have never learned, or as quickly, or got that outreach to different religious lives, and to learn different things, and to just broaden my mind so much spiritually and intellectually. So that was amazing. And that was probably those were the highlights of like, okay, yeah, that's what I paid for, right? Because there was times where I was like, oh, I missed the talk. But I was like, it was because I was talking to this monk for 40 minutes already. And that was amazing. There was even a point where I was walking around, and one of the one of the priests I was talking to, Father Jose Maria, I'm just walking down the halls or aisles. It's not that, but to the different rows, and he sees me. He's like, "Hey, Robert, do you know where we can get some coffee at?" Just like almost like I was a friend, right? Just asking me a question, right? I didn't really have an answer, but it was still cool. Okay, let's get to the actual talks now, right? So I have my notes here. So if you see me looking at the notes. So the first talk, as soon as we got there, was by Dr. Arthur Brooks. So Arthur Brooks is I believe a professor at Harvard Business School, or Harvard in business, not in business, but I believe he teaches something along the lines of the science of happiness. And he first started off, it's not like super philosophical or anything. It is actual neuroscience, right? And that's what he gets down to. But there was a point where he's like, the most questions I get asked are not about the class per se, but he says his faith is the most important thing of his life at the start of his class. And kids ask, tell us more about that than the nitty-gritty of all the neuroscience and the hard science behind it. Your faith, tell us more about your faith and how to be happy. So he kind of breaks down happiness into 3 ways, but he starts off as saying happiness is a gateway drug into heaven, right? But he also talks about how feelings play into that. He says feelings are just evidence of happiness, not happiness itself. Just like how the smell of your Thanksgiving dinner is not your Thanksgiving dinner, it's evidence of it. You would never say the smell of it is my Thanksgiving dinner. Just like how feelings aren't actual happiness itself, just evidence of it. So he breaks down happiness or how to be happy in your life into 3 sects, right? So enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And basically saying if you get all these down authentically, you will be happy, right? I think he says you will live a happier life. First starts off with talking about 3 sets of brain functions that we have. The first being the most basic, the most animalistic, the most reptilian, right? He calls it the reptilian brain, or this is also what other neuroscientists call this function in our brain, the reptilian brain. So the reptilian brain processes signals. It perceives signals first that happen all around us that we don't necessarily notice or that are unconscious to us, like the air or breathing or the smell of air, stuff like that. Things we do not that air has a smell, but the things that we do not consciously process, like that we think about, right, that are below our level of consciousness, that just we do, right? Very animalistic, right? The second is the limbic system, which I believe he says this is what we share with all mammals. So this is what receives the signals and then turns those signals, these carnal signals, into emotions and feelings, right? And he talks about how emotions are nothing more than data or information. So meaning there is no such thing as bad or good feelings, and that it's very surface level because they're just data and information. That's all it is. It's just information to tell us what's going on around us, right? And we haven't perceived it yet or how we're going to act upon it, but it's so we know how to act. But this part of the brain isn't when we do that acting part of it. The third function is the prefrontal cortex, the most human part of the brain. This is when we decide what to do with those emotions, what they mean, what they are, and how to react to them. So you go through these emotions, you have this detection, right? You're detecting these signals. you turn them into emotion, and then you make a decision, right? So detection being the first part of your brain, the reptilian part of your brain. The second being emotion, being your limbic system, turning these into emotions, receiving these signals, right? And then decision, the prefrontal cortex. You're deciding how to act upon these emotions, right? He talks about maybe a flaw that at times we are reactive. So when we don't have enough time for the prefrontal cortex to decide what we want to do with these emotions, so we just act purely upon those emotions. And sometimes this might be natural that it just a split second thing and it just happens because you don't have time to process it through the prefrontal cortex. And then you react solely on those emotions, on this data. You're acting very reactive, right? Very animalistic, if you will, kind of bound to our carnal, not desires, but our the things we perceive signals. And so we perceive them and then we just push them back out, right? It's cold and I don't like it, right? As opposed to thinking, okay, it's cold, and thinking through it, and okay, this doesn't bring me a good emotion, but I can decide to get a blanket, or I can decide to live through, or decide it's not that bad. He also said that children is a great example of people who are very reactive. To give an example, that they act solely at the second function of the brain. So from the signals, perceiving the signals, and then putting them into emotions, and then acting right upon those emotions, as opposed to, let's say, bringing them to the prefrontal cortex and deciding what to do with them, kind of like thinking it out. So what is enjoyment? Is enjoyment purely pleasure? The pleasure we feel through money or food? No. He says this is wrong, right? And as Christians, I think that is very true, right? Enjoyment isn't just our carnal pleasures being answered, right? Pleasure is very, very limbic. Enjoyment involves the prefrontal cortex, if that makes sense. That pleasure is purely carnal and emotional, while enjoyment is limbic. He says this, enjoyment is limbic, right? He talks about pleasure being incomplete, and that the flaw is when it breaks down at the second function, which would be mere pleasure, kind of boosting up our emotions and the surface level things and making us feel good and have our feelings feel good and emotions feel good, right? So pleasure is incomplete. It's not the end all be all, right? And I think we can agree with that I can fill my life with pleasures, but at the end of the day, I'm not fulfilled. There is no enjoyment, right? So pleasure is incomplete. Sources of pleasure, when you add two things to them, which is people and memory, that equals enjoyment. And that's how you get happiness, right? I don't know if I understand that yet, because sometimes I think, is life just about happiness? But I understand that it's a good thing to strive for happiness. So that is not a bad thing at all. So his next part of his threefold system to happiness, if you will, is satisfaction, right? So enjoyment, satisfaction, meaning. So what is satisfaction? Satisfaction is the joy you get after struggling to achieve something. And this flows greatly from our enjoyment of things to the satisfaction we get out of the struggle to do certain things, right? So as opposed to just acting purely on our emotions, we decide what to do with those signals, turn into emotions, and decide how to act upon those things. So he talks about when you struggle, that is what satisfaction is. What has more satisfaction? when you cheat on a test and get the A, or when you struggle to get the A, when you studied, when you read, when you practiced, right? And then getting the A, it feels so much better. In both instances, you got the A. So that stays the same. But what changes is the work we put before it, right? We can say, okay, we put less work, yes, but there is no satisfaction when you just cheat, right? You get the same letter grade, right? Result in that sense, but the result of enjoyment of receiving that A and the satisfaction of struggle to get that A makes that result so much better. It's the same letter grade, but the result of satisfaction is so much better. But again, satisfaction does not stay, he says. We continue to seek after the satisfaction, even though we know it will not stay. We know it won't last. Similar to how we seek to boost up our emotions and our feelings when those do not last. And maybe satisfaction lasts a little bit longer. The satisfaction of getting awards and getting nominated for things and getting noticed and recognized. Yes, those last a little bit longer and those are complemented with our emotions and our feelings. But again, those do not last. So that's not happiness either, right? I think it's also his point. He quotes St. Thomas Aquinas, right? He quotes St. Thomas Aquinas saying, the substitutes of God are money, power, pleasure, and fame. How relevant is that to today? Still, St. Thomas Aquinas lived 800 years ago, and that still persists today. How many of us still strive towards money and power and pleasure and fame? How much do we see that in our modern culture of money, power, pleasure, and fame? That's all that is promoted. When do you see living a life of simplicity and poverty ever promoted, or a life of less power and more humility, or a life of less pleasure and more mortification, a life of less fame, but living again simply and not in the eyes of the media purely for fame, right? That's the contrary is promoted. Money, power, pleasure, and fame. Keep building those up and you'll be happy. Keep building those up and you'll be successful. You'll be satisfied. You'll be fulfilled. But we see the exact opposite. We see these people with money, power, pleasure, and most of all fame, they're killing themselves. And now I'm not saying every person with money, power, pleasure, and fame are horrible or unsatisfied or are eventually going to kill themselves. No, because there are people who have had money, power, pleasure, and fame, most of all being fame, and still have found a life with Christ. Obviously, it makes it a lot harder, I would say. But how often do we substitute God as the center of our lives with money, power, pleasure, and fame? And when you think about it, money, power, pleasure, and fame did not create the universe, aren't the eternal substance of the universe, aren't the eternal act of being itself. If someone said that, even if you didn't really think about God's nature, you wouldn't believe that. So why so often do we substitute God for money, power, pleasure, and fame? I've said it so many times now, right? And that's not to say I'm not guilty of that. How many times do I want money to buy things, to buy nice clothes, or to look good for other people for the fame, and then to have more power and to please myself, right? I am guilty of this, right? But we must understand that that's not going to bring me happiness, because ultimately happiness resides in Christ, and the rest and peace and fulfillment ultimately resides in Christ. When we just, as opposed to just filling ourselves up with satisfaction, right? That is, I would say, like a level above our emotional very animalistic pleasures. We get satisfaction from doing things, right? He breaks down satisfaction into an equation, if you will. He says satisfaction is what you have over what you want, right? And in our modern culture today, that is true, what you have divided by what you want. So how do you become successful? You have more, right? But if you reduce the denominator, that makes the number bigger, right? It's simple math here. If we have 10 things, but we want 100 things, we only have 10% satisfaction, let's say. But the more we reduce what we want, the more percentage we have, right? By a vast amount. So the goal is to have less wants, not have less haves, right? Of course, we should strive to have less in the sense of we don't need all these materialistic things to be happy, of course. And who might look around me, look at all the things I have, look at the clothes I wear, right? I understand that. But it's also to want less, right? To want to have less. That is really where it's at, is when I can deny myself things and totally not take up things at all, or not buy things, or not buy the fancy clothes, or not buy the most expensive this, or not have the most expensive car or house. Our satisfaction grows exponentially, right? So finally, his third part to happiness, his third thing we have to perfect authentically, maybe not perfect, but strive towards the authentic version of it, is meaning, right? We need to have meaning in our lives. No one lives their life without meaning, right? Whether we know it or not. The atheist can say that there is no meaning to life. Then why live? But I guess even to live the life with no meaning is the meaning of life, then is to live it as if there is no meaning. But we do not live out our lives as if there is no meaning. We certainly don't act like that, like there is no meaning to the homeless person on the street, or our mothers or our fathers, right? Most of us. Or act in our own consciousness as there is no meaning. Don't get me wrong, I think at times we say there's no meaning to my life. Life is meaningless. And this is a topic for another day, but if life were truly meaningless, why would that be a sad thing? If life has no meaning, what's the point of finding meaning in it and then to be sad about it? Because then if there is no meaning, there's no point. Go ahead and do whatever you would like. There's no meaning. Good or bad ceases to exist. There is no meaning. Anyways, he says, you may be able to live a long time without enjoyment and even satisfaction, but not meaning, right? We could live without ever feeling enjoyment or satisfaction. But if we lose meaning, we lose everything, and we fall into despair and even suicidal in some ways, right? He asked us to be able to answer these two questions to really fulfill our lives, right? Why are you alive? And to help, you can ask the question, who created you and for what reason? Why are you alive? And what are you willing to give up your life for right now, happily and willingly, right? And it's good if you can't answer those questions, because then that gives you meaning to figure that out. And then when you figure that out, that is your meaning of your life. I think it's maybe not undermined, but coated over with Jesus is the meaning of our life. He is meaning itself. But in a day-to-day, everyday lay person thing, why are you alive? And what are you willing to give up your life for? It says we must answer these questions if we want to live true enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. He asks us to ask ourselves again, what am I doing that brings me pleasure that I need to turn into enjoyment? Right? Again, to that carnal pleasure of just emotions, to enjoyment, and then ultimately to satisfaction. That again brings us meaning, right? So how have we been pursuing our haves when we need to pursue to need to have less wants, right? And then that gives us meaning to our life. I think it's a lot that you kind of have to put together. I don't think we should get too heady about it and kind of like, oh, it's too much, and then throw our life. No, they kind of all work together as a trinity, if you will, in this threefold way. They all kind of connect, and if done authentically at each point, they naturally lead into the next. It makes sense, right? God created us that way and created our conscious that way to be able to not easily, but in such a way that it's already planned out, in the sense of you still have to work and struggle at times for that satisfaction, for that meaning, but it's not like you're figuring this out all for the first time that, oh my gosh, I need to find enjoyment and satisfaction and meaning in my life. Or like, people have gone through this before, I guess is what I'm saying. And it's not that you are alone in that sense. We're all trying to find meaning for our lives, right? And ultimately the meaning for our life is to love God and to worship God. By his nature, we are to worship him. And then to love others, right? And that love, I believe St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila talk about love being triune in a sense. I think St. Augustine also talks about love is a reflection or an analogy to the Trinity, in a sense that God is the lover, or God the Father is the lover, Jesus is the beloved receiving the love, and the Holy Spirit is the love between them, right? And in that sense, love is a trinity, the same way the Trinity is a trinity, that God is a trinity. Also in the same way, to love God, I must love neighbor. To love neighbor, I must love myself. To love God, I must love myself. To love God, I must love my neighbor, right? It's trinity thing, because God tells us what is the greatest commandment? To love God. What's right after? To love thy neighbor. Next thing, as yourself. So if I don't love myself, I cannot love my neighbor. If I don't love my neighbor, I cannot love God. I believe, is it John 4:20 tells us that if you say you hate your brother who you can see, how can you say you love your Father who you cannot see, right? So we have to love them in the same way we love ourselves. And now when I say to love yourself, it's not love of self, right? This self-love looking inward and it only being about me and me being myself, the center, and me being my own God. It's not the love of self, but the love of myself as a creation of God, that God made us good. We have to love ourselves in that way. And then I can love my neighbor and ultimately love God, which is the meaning to our lives. So thank you for watching the Community of Saints podcast. This is day 1, part 1, because there is still a whole nother talk that I want to go through. Sister Mary Grace, one of my favorite speakers. I was so excited to see her talk. She did a meet and greet, but the line was so long, and I was just like, God bless her. I'll meet her one day, hopefully, maybe, we'll get her on the podcast one day. But yes, this has been the Community of Saints podcast. My name is Roberto Aguilar. Thank you all for watching, and may the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all.